Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. We're back to using the microphone because in my last video, I used my DJI microphone so I could be hands-free, but I realized it was picking up background noise. So we're gonna go back to using this microphone. Okay, so I'm really excited for this episode because I know a lot of you ask about root causes, about the gut microbiome, how to address microbiome dysbiosis, things like that. And so I'm actually gonna be diving right into the GI map today, which is a test that I often use depending on the clinical case. I like using this test when I'm suspecting that there's something else going on in the gut that we can't actually see clinically or by doing an assessment. Now, I just want to preface in saying that while testing is important, it's not the only thing that we look at. I always make sure that we're assessing not only the testing, we're also looking at clinical symptoms, diet, stress, nervous system, and other factors that we know can impact eczema. We're not going to get too clinical into the numbers because I know a lot of you listening aren't practitioners. You're mostly people that have eczema. So I'm going to give you a general overview of the common findings that we see on GI map for people with eczema. First of all, what exactly is GI map? GI map is a very comprehensive stool test that looks at the DNA of microorganisms in the gut. It's a highly sensitive test, meaning that it picks up things very easily. That being said, sometimes when we see elevations in certain numbers, it doesn't necessarily mean we always treat it. We don't want to be treating the numbers and treating the labs. We also have to look at the whole clinical picture. But this test looks at the microorganisms, it looks at opportunistic microorganisms that we don't want to see elevated on the test. It looks at pathogens. So if there are overgrowth of bacteria, viruses, parasites, those pathogens also get picked up. It also looks at commensals, which is important because when we're assessing a clinical case, we want to look at what are the good microbes looking like in the gut microbiome. The GI map actually picks up the different good bacteria that we want to see present in the gut. And what I love about the GI map test too, it also looks at digestive function and the immune function in the gut. So there are certain markers that tell us how the immune system is actually functioning at the gut level. It looks at digestive function. It looks at whether or not there's actually inflammation in the GI tract. I'll share my screen in a moment here, so I'll show you guys the different parts of the GI map so you can kind of see what I mean when I'm looking at these different parts of the GI map. So why can GI map be helpful? Certainly, it's not a test that I recommend everyone to do. Obviously, if you have the resources and money is an issue, then I do recommend doing a GI map test just so we can see what is your microbiome looking like? What is the state of the ecosystem? Is there something that we're missing that we can actually see with testing? It can actually be reassuring for a lot of people as well that they're experiencing all these weird symptoms, skin, digestion, and not really knowing exactly why. The GI map can show us patterns as to why someone may be experiencing certain symptoms. Now, it's not like we're looking for one root cause. Again, I want to repeat this because I think people need to really remember that we're not looking for a root cause. We are to some extent, but we have to look at the whole clinical picture and not just think, okay, if there is something that's elevated on this test, that means that's your root cause. So again, we don't want to treat the labs. We want to look at the person. GI map also helps to guide interventions. So when I look at someone's stool test, it can actually see, okay, what can we do supplement-wise to address the dysbiosis, to address the inflammation. I do actually write GI map protocols for my patients that have done the stool test. Protocol breaks down my recommendations based on the findings. Okay, so that's basically a quick overview of the GI map. Without further ado, let me share my screen so I can show you actual patient cases. Okay, so here's an example of a patient case. This is one of my patients that came to me with eczema. She was also dealing with perioral dermatitis as well as rosacea. She was dealing with multiple inflammatory skin conditions. I'm gonna jump straight into the bacteria because I actually went through the different pages of the GI map in a separate video. I will link it here. So if you want to actually understand each page, then make sure you check out that video. This patient is a really interesting case. She was dealing with the different skin conditions, as I mentioned. And one of the things that was elevated for her, we'll start with the opportunistic microbes. So these are the microbes that we don't want to see elevated because they can create inflammation in the body. You could see here that there's elevations in Staph aureus, and Streptococcus. So I would say a majority of my eczema and skin cases I've seen, it's very commonly elevated, these 3 bacteria. And it's interesting that we're seeing an elevation common with eczema cases in Staph, because we know that there's a relationship between Staph and eczema when it comes to the skin. Staph lives on the skin, and when someone's dealing with eczema and flare-ups, there's actually increased amount of Staph colonization in those specific patches, in those specific flares, which is why people with severe eczema, they end up having Staph infections. So we know there's an association between Staph colonization on the skin and eczema severity. What's really interesting in the evolving research, we're also seeing that people with eczema also have elevation of Staph aureus in the gut. Now, that doesn't mean the Staph in the gut is causing the eczema, but it's interesting to see that there's some broader changes in the microbiome and the immune system, because we know the microbiome influences the immune system and how that can affect both the gut and the skin. So it basically reinforces the connection between the gut and the skin in a way. While we don't really know yet whether one causes the other, it isn't clear, there is that association that I'm seeing in these stool tests. There's an elevation in Staph aureus and the Staph species in general. With Staph and also with strep as well, is that there is an association with the elevations of these bacteria with low stomach acid. Our stomach needs acid to break down food, to break down proteins especially. And it also needs to be in an acidic state to keep opportunistic microbes, to keep pathogens away. When we see elevations in Staph and strep, we're also thinking about, okay, how is this person digesting? Do they likely have low stomach acid? Because it's a common finding that we see across people with skin issues and even just people with digestive issues as well. When the environment in the gut is not acidic enough, that's how these microbes grow. And with strep, it's a bacteria that's normally found orally and also in the upper GI tract. So when I see that elevated, I'm asking clinical questions. If they're having acid reflux, if they're having indigestion, are they constipated? Do they have a history of antibiotics? Because antibiotics can wipe out also the good bacteria, and that can allow more of these bad microbes to overgrow. So it's interesting what we're seeing in this case of eczema and other skin issues is that she has these elevations in these certain opportunistic microbes. The other bacteria that I often see with skin cases, especially those with chronic hives, is H. pylori. It's something that's pretty commonly talked about in the functional space. I've actually been seeing quite a bit of these cases in GI map, particularly for this client. Her level isn't flagged red. And that's the thing about H. pylori is you can have H. pylori without having a flagged result. This is why, again, we want to pay attention to the symptoms. I've had cases where I treated H. pylori even if the result isn't flagged as red, and it just depends on the symptoms. Some of the textbook symptoms that we see for H. pylori are the upper GI symptoms. So people that have chronic acid reflux, they don't really know why they're having that. They feel like this burning sensation in their stomach all the time. They're experiencing cramps here and there. They're feeling early fullness. So they're not eating the largest meal, but they get full very quickly. And they're not digesting proteins. That's a big one. Because what H. pylori actually does is it can actually lower stomach acid. You need stomach acid to break down foods, but you particularly need stomach acid to break down protein. And so when I'm assessing digestive symptoms in my patients' clients, and they share to me that they're not digesting protein, I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking, okay, is there a possible H. pylori infection that we need to treat? You could also be asymptomatic with H. pylori. Believe it or not, 80% of people with H. pylori are asymptomatic. And H. pylori is highly contagious. I've seen cases of someone that has H. pylori and so did their significant other. And so we're running GI map tests on couples, and both of their tests showed increased levels of H. pylori. Some other symptoms that we see are B12 deficiency and iron deficiency, because H. pylori can actually compete with those nutrients. I'm going to show you an actual case of H. pylori that didn't have a super elevated level, as you can see here. She had a 4.44 e to the power of 2 versus the reference level here. But for her case, we actually treated because she had the symptoms of H. pylori. She had the burning sensation, abdominal cramps, B12 deficiency, as well as iron deficiency. She also had skin issues, eczema, and hives here and there. So clinically, her symptoms guided us towards H. pylori. While her levels weren't flagged, it's high enough in addition to her symptoms for us to treat it. So that's an interesting bacteria that I'm always looking at for eczema cases, chronic hives, and even gut issues. And since we're already here, I want to show you the beneficial bacteria that I'm also looking at as well on a GI map. Typically, we want our bacteria levels, good microbes, to be in the green range. And there's specific bacteria that I love looking at because it can give us an idea as to what someone's diet looks like. The last 3 bacteria bacteria Akkermansia, Faecalibacterium, and Rosebaria are all microbes that feed on fiber. It produces something called short chain fatty acids, which is when bacteria feeds on the fibers in your diet. And the short chain fatty acids has been shown to help with inflammation, immune modulation, also help to support skin health. Oftentimes in cases I've seen with eczema is that the Akkermansia level is completely non-detected. So it'll actually say DL, which means non-detectable levels. I'll share a screenshot here. Actually, the last patient had DL levels, but for her, she's actually fine. But these are really important bacteria because they produce short chain fatty acids. They help to support the gut barrier integrity. So in our gut, we have the mucus layer, we have the gut lining, and we need good levels of the bacteria because if we don't have a good, strong layer of our gut, then this is when microbes can start to enter, the ones that aren't good. They start to release inflammatory molecules that can create all kinds of symptoms, eczema being one of them. The other thing that people notice is food sensitivities. If your gut barrier is leaky or it's compromised, then you have a higher opportunity of reacting to foods because the food particles that are coming from your food is leaking through the gut. So when someone's bacteria levels are low, then that's when we want to look at, okay, how much fiber is this person getting? Are they eating enough prebiotics, probiotics? Are they getting lots of different color? Because that is what fuels the good microbes. That's basically the commensals. And as you can see here, similarly to the last case that I showed you, this patient also had elevations in Staph aureus and Streptococcus. Interesting again, right? We are seeing this pretty consistently with our eczema cases. She also had other elevations in other bacteria as well, which I won't dive into because there's obviously a lot and we're not doing a full GI map interpretation today. Sometimes we can pick up Candida. I recently did another GI map test and she had very obvious clinical symptoms of Candida. She had patches that were really round. They were showing up in areas where she sweats, armpits, just very fungal looking. She also has cravings for sugar and carbs. And so we did find Candida on the test. So that was really interesting that what we can find on the stool test. Though again, there's always discrepancies, stool testing, lab testing, all kinds of testing. And while they are good tools, they are never diagnostic. We're not using GI map to diagnose anything. Okay, so as I mentioned, the last piece of the GI map I like to look at are intestinal health markers. So this is looking at someone's digestive function, their immune system, how well they are actually recycling hormones and toxins. I'll just point out the main ones I see on the map for eczema that are often low or high. Elastase. So that is an enzyme that's secreted by your pancreas. If someone is not digesting well or they're constipated, I will often see that in the red. So in those cases, we want to support digestive function. Beta-glucuronidase, that's the GI marker here. This looks at how you're recycling hormones and toxins out of the body. What I often see in eczema cases is that if someone is experiencing flare-ups during their cycle, especially in the luteal phase into the menstrual phase, or if someone experiencing a lot of PMS symptoms, that tells me that there's excess estrogen that is circulating in the body that's not recycling properly. Their beta-glucuronidase will be really high. So there are targeted supplements to address this as well as nutrition interventions. Secretory IgA is probably another favorite that I like to look at. That is basically looking at the immune system in the gut. So how is your defense system? Is it non-existent, low, or is it highly alert? I see both in eczema cases. I've seen secretory IgA very low. I've seen it very high. When it's very low, it can indicate that there's not enough mucosal support. So going back to the commensals, there's some sort of compromise in the gut lining, not enough commensals, or there's too much opportunistic microbes that is affecting the mucosal lining. I also see low secretory IgA in patients that are chronically stressed. Their immune system is just not responding. In high cases, that usually tells us because your immune system is on high alert, it is actively fighting something. So if there's an active H. pylori infection, if your immune system is overactive and it's very inflamed, then we will see high levels of secretory IgA. I had a patient case. I'll share a screenshot of her Antigliadin IgA, but that basically looks at your immune response to gluten. And she had always suspected if she was sensitive to gluten, but she wasn't entirely sure. When she ate gluten, she would notice flare-ups and she would also notice joint pain. And so when we ran her GI map test, her test actually showed that she had sensitivity to the proteins found in gluten as part of her intervention, she had to remove gluten completely. Okay, so you can probably tell that the GI map can look overwhelming. There's a lot of numbers, and so it's really important that if you are doing the test, make sure you have a clinician to help you interpret your results and make those recommendations. Don't try to figure this out on your own. And the purpose of me showing the GI map test is, I know, first of all, you have a lot of questions about the microbes that can affect the skin, but the take-home message is that the GI map is a tool, not a diagnosis. We're always looking at patterns and looking at the context. So even if there's an elevation in staph, elevation in a certain microbe, it doesn't necessarily mean that we need to treat it. We want to create an environment for good bacteria to thrive, and we do that through nutrition, certain supplements, and also lifestyle factors impact the microbiome as well. If you found this video helpful and you learned something new today, then make sure you hit the like button, leave us a comment below, let me know if you have done the GI map test before and if you have any questions about what I talked about today. And if you want to do the GI map test, this is something that I offer as one of my services, whether you're in Canada, US, or Europe. I'll leave the link in the description below, and that includes the full GI map order to directly sent to your home, and you have the option to do a 60-minute interpretation session as well. There's always a link to book a free discovery call if you're not sure if you want to do the GI map or you want to just have a conversation about what you actually need. I'll leave that in the description as well. Thank you so much for being here. I am about to prepare for a presentation to the CBSA officers, which is the Border Patrol Services of Canada. And this weekend, I'm actually going to Amsterdam. So I'll be there Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And given that you guys are looking for more behind the scenes, I'll definitely share that. Have a good rest of your day, and we will see you in the next one.